It's just like I see that and I get so mad. I get so fucking mad. I'm just like, who the fuck is this 23-year-old bitch? I don't care. Like, I don't
Right.
fucking care. That thinks like this whole school should just like bend to her will. And like people are throwing around the word harmful. Harm is, one of those words that we use around social issues in ways where it doesn't make sense. And it's like silence is violence,
Well, yeah, it's
you know?
hyperbole. It's this kind of extreme
But it's
hyperbole.
not
Yeah.
used in a hyperbolic way. It's used in a very serious, this causes harm way.
Well, yeah,
That's the
but
problem,
yeah.
is that it's not hyperbolic, is that it's like they mean every word of it.
Well, they believe it, but like it's still
And
exaggeration
so
of
then
what it
it
is.
feels
Yeah.
like when we use like hyperbole in like everyday conversation, it feels like suddenly you're making a bad statement. You're like, wait, no, like I didn't quite mean, like I find myself
Right.
explaining myself when
Of
when
course.
I'm being hyperbolic because I'm like, I need to clarify that,
Yeah.
like,
It's interesting how I talk with you about this all the time. Like I'm fascinated by how social media changed not just the way we talk, but the way we like kind of interact, not like just
well,
the
it
way we
changed the way we
speak.
think. It changed
That's
everything.
yeah,
It changed the way we see
like
ourselves in the world.
it changed this kind of
It
like
changed
everybody
everything.
is on the defensive because they're constantly getting that kind of real-time feedback on social media comments and things, so everybody is more defensive, everybody is
But
more tense,
you also
everybody is
know
more willing
though,
to be bad
like when I
faith.
see this with like 20 something year olds, and I'm just like, yeah, I get it. Like, it's not like we don't have something to say when we're 20, but like we have to stop being
Yeah,
like,
most people don't have anything
they
to
know
say.
what's
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not trying to like totally devalue like
Of course.
if we were
Yeah.
20 and we were saying shit and we had complaints about shit, like we would want it to be taken seriously. But like,
Right.
we also would have gotten smacked down if we were out of order. Like,
Well, the biggest problem is that yeah, like it is this ignorance. It's people,
but
they haven't
it's
done
all.
anything. They haven't read anything. I mean, their entire
It's not
our
even the ignorance that's the problem.
well,
It's the top heavy. So, well, it's, I mean,
it's
chicken and
allowing the
egg.
ignorance
It's I
to
I don't know which comes first. I have to think on it. But like, yeah, it's
I know what you
allowing
mean
that
though,
to like,
yeah.
yeah, it's like a combination of like really top heavy like administrative bullshit.
Right.
Yes, there are teachers. I think there are a lot of teachers who are just sort of doing whatever everyone else is doing because they're afraid.
Yeah.
I mean, dude, like I tell you all the time, like I know two people that work at like who teach there. I know three actually. One decided not to teach this semester. All related. They're all in the same family. um, all teach there. And they've all gotten bullshit. They've all gotten bullshit from students, from in
Right.
some cases from deans, and they're all part-time faculty too.
Right. In some
And
cases
the
they're not
second
even
students go to them.
teachers. They're just like student services positions and people are just being rude as shit, just being
Yeah, but this is like these are teachers and this is classroom related stuff. And it's like, oh, like some student went and complained to the dean. The dean then like, yeah,
caved. Yeah.
yeah, the dean didn't even just cave, just like went ahead and emailed to be like, but yeah, like I mean, to the point where the dean straight up emailed that adjunct and said, "This is what your student said, and you need to correct it,"
Right.
basically. And what the students had said was like, well, he told us that we aren't allowed, we'll be penalized for being late, but he's always late, except he's not always late. He's there in the classroom. He's just setting up. I'm like, he's the teacher. He gets to do that. He also might get to stand there and wait for the late students to arrive. That's to their benefit, even though, yeah, he says you get penalized.
Yeah. Well, I reached a point where
It's
I'm just, yeah,
insanity.
like I am not,
I have no faith in it.
yeah,
And
like I
I
am no
don't know that I
longer,
have it in me to like pick up, like, on top of like all of the sort of online bullshit of it. I just can't.
yeah. Well, yeah, I think you're right. It's a failure of the administration because the administration's
I mean,
job is
it's the
to,
whole thing.
yeah,
It's the administration, it's the presidents,
well, it's all,
it's the whole.
because their job is to, yes, hear students' complaints, but the idea is to, like your job is still to the institution, which is protecting everybody, not just
Yeah.
some angry student who got failed in a class they think they shouldn't have been
That's
failed
what I
in,
mean.
you
It's
know.
just like they take any student complaint now, and it's like they take it so seriously to
Right.
the point where it's just like, yeah, it's to the point where we're just firing adjuncts because they showed a historical painting that scholars do study and should be like,
I
you know,
mean, I've been saying
after
this.
giving ample disclaimers to be like,
Yeah.
you don't have, like, you can leave. This is in
Right.
the
Yeah.
syllabus. Like, I gave everyone time to leave before it came
This
on
is part of
screen.
the world.
The
Like,
student chose to sit there
yeah.
and then like cried because they had to look at it.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, shut up. You chose this. Like, you chose this. You
Well,
decided.
and it's a false claim, you know. Is this student really upset because they saw an image? You know, are they really upset about that?
I know.
I
I,
doubt. I
I
doubt it.
doubt it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this comes from like an ego thing.
Well, it comes from a learned behavior that I think is a learned kind of reaction. And social media obviously reinforces it, but it's just like a learned behavior. Is this is how you behave when you're mad at the teacher or you want to get back at somebody, or you know, it's kind of crazy. But then that's being treated as, you know, it's as real. So we have to treat every little thing as if it's like completely genuine and serious, which is a failure of, yeah, the administration's job. Their job is to literally filter out, yeah, the serious and real stuff from the just, you know, hyperbolic exaggerations. And, you know, even if the person was genuinely hurt by it, it's like, well, I mean, yeah, you could have walked out of the room and come back. You could have, I mean, like, this is college. It's, you know, hate is written about
It
this.
wasn't even in person. It was online. It was all
It was
online.
online. Yeah.
And she said, I'm going to give you like 2 minutes to, you know, I gave a disclaimer. I'm giving you some time to decide to walk away. And now I'm going to show the image.
I wonder if doing that gives people the option, like just making that disclaimer allows people to start thinking that, like, oh, well, I can go against this or something. Or, like you said, this kind of ego trip where they can be like, well, I can get this professor, you know, I have power over your job. I have power over you, actually. When really they don't, but the administration does. And the administration is allowing people to just pick and choose.
I mean,
It's really incredible. I
I
mean,
think
they're
on
not
some
doing their
level, it's
job.
just,
Yeah.
it's hot to be victimized. It's hot to be the victim.
Yeah. But that's like a learned thing too. Like that's like it's just we emphasize it constantly. Like it's literally part of the curriculum.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean we talk about this mainly in the context of our field. So
Yeah. And even, I mean, even this like most recent one is art history. Like,
right, which overlaps with our field a
yeah.
little bit. Yeah. So this is, you know, publishing industry has had similar issues that overlaps with us that
I just wish that there were more prominent like literary people that were like looking at this and going, this is fucked.
there's only one I know of that's like really big and
I
famous
haven't
that's
seen a
doing
single
it.
poet post about this, at least not on
Not a
Instagram, but
single
I don't think I
poet,
will.
not a poet, especially not a mainstream poet. Maybe some of the self-published
Yeah,
poets
I'm
will,
only following like mainstream people,
but like
and
a
it's like no one's talking about it, but
but the only mainstream figure that's actually, I would say, doing like actually speaking out in a very kind of like, you know, calm, normal, like 5 years ago it wouldn't have been a controversy at all, is Joyce Carol Oates. Joyce Carol Oates
no, I'm sure
has
people hate
been,
her.
she does. She gets a lot of shit for it online. She gets a lot of shit for it.
She's also not someone I really like, I don't think.
I'm not a huge fan of her either, but she's kind of in that weird kind of quasi literary, quasi pop kind of
Yeah, I feel
area.
like she once like said some shit that I was just like, bitch, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But so like,
And she's
but
written so
yeah,
many books that, like, yeah, they can't all be good. She's got a couple really good ones. I think she's written over like 60 books or something in her career. She's up there now, but you know, she's been around a while. She's seen a thing or two, and she's been not very vocal, but the most vocal I've seen out of all the big writers that could be, kind of thing. Like that's it
yeah,
in terms of like, yeah, like you're actually taking away good art, you're taking away freedom of expression. You're taking away what makes art so great and romanticized and why we love it, kind
Well,
of
it's just
thing.
like,
And
I mean, he can't just start claiming like,
they can now, yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous to be like, now that people feel bad, they feel disrespected. Um, so we will not show this
Well, that's what
historic
really,
14th
yeah.
century. I mean, and it's not like even like it's not. I just don't see reason in it. I don't
Well, there
like
isn't. Yeah, there's none.
to suggest that this is like Islamophobic or that
Well,
it's
it's not. Yeah,
harmful
that's the problem. Is that so anybody
for
can say
somebody
that, but it's
whose
not.
religion it is not and
Right.
is studying it in the context of art history.
Literally, yeah. That's the most important
Like,
part. The context of a survey course that goes through all of world history in art.
yeah,
Like, that's the context that we're talking here. It wasn't somebody putting this up at, like, a local coffee shop or something. It was
to be like,
literally.
look at it.
Right. It wasn't even a satire cartoon like everybody wants to talk about Charlie Hebdo and
Right.
stuff like that. It was not that.
But
And
even
even
then,
then, I support the artists.
I
Yeah, I'm on
support
this
it.
right.
Yeah.
I'm this on the side of Charlie
You
Hebdo
can't
artists for that.
assert. I
You're
think
allowed
it's
to
just
write that.
like
Yeah, like
this
this
piece of
is.
this religion that
Yeah.
I'm just like, yeah, no, you can't. Like, yeah, you can observe that as best as you can, but you cannot force it upon the world.
Well,
It's,
now they can.
I
Yeah.
mean, but like, yeah, I mean, you can't, not outside of universities, it's not going to happen.
You know what I'd be interesting to see how that lawsuit plays out too, because they didn't sue them for, and I get it. This person's an adjunct. I don't know the history of that person, but like, if they
Well,
have
she's suing
money
for
to, yeah,
defamation.
like if they have money or something to pay for a lawyer, but I mean, like if they don't, I'm assuming they don't because they're an adjunct. Like,
Yeah.
this is a
I was
cost. Like
shocked
this
that
is
I
time,
was shocked that it
energy,
happened.
money, a
I
lot of money. Yeah.
felt really disheartened when I read the first article because I was like, she's not even going to sue, but I hope she does. Like,
Right.
I hope
Yeah.
something
And
happens.
I guess
And I was glad that there was
Fire's
any,
doing it, right? So it might be nonprofit, so they might not be charging her
yeah,
money.
I don't know. But either way, it's so insane to
Yeah, it's
me
absurd.
that also that this guy could be like, well, this was my opinion. It's like, no, it wasn't.
Right. It's not even his real. He doesn't even hold it. Yeah, that's the thing. That's what.
You
If it were
can't you
one
can't
thing,
state something
yeah,
on behalf of the school and then say it was your opinion. Do you
yeah,
understand how that's fucked up also?
right.
Like, no, it was the school's opinion because you were a school official and you were making a statement.
And not just a
This was
statement. You
not
were
like your
taking an action.
personal.
You were taking a
Yeah.
disciplinary action, and they were trying to hide behind the bureaucratic response, which is sure people can be fired for any reason,
And well,
particularly
no, people don't
non-tenured
get fired.
staff.
People just whose their contracts don't get
Right.
renewed.
Don't get renewed.
Except I think we can like just stop being assholes and call it what it is. Especially if she was lined up to teach in the next semester
Right.
anyway.
Already
Yeah, I
assigned the
think that
courses. Yeah.
yeah, I think that you can come out and say yes, she was fired.
Right.
But also I like that she said, no, I will not at this time accept a position if they offered me one. Because they've walked it back, you
Yeah,
know.
I saw that. They walked back as soon as the lawsuit was filed by a big
Yeah,
organization like Fire. Yeah.
because they
Because
probably
it's,
didn't
yeah,
think an
because they didn't think.
adjunct
Yeah.
would come at them.
Well, and because it's like, that's the thing is we're taking this one person's
But
complaint
adjuncts are
seriously.
already really angry. I think like a lot of us would be actually willing to take that hit. Like,
Yeah, of course. Especially if Fire and organizations willing to help us with
yeah,
the legal stuff. Yes, of course.
mhm,
But that's the
I
thing
would
is
be.
like even if this student, like even if this, the hypothetical student was claiming they believe this, like I don't believe that you actually believe that. Like I don't believe that seeing this picture in the context of an art history class like caused
Genuinely
yeah,
caused
I
you
do not
harm.
believe it. I believe that the person is a liar, and I think more people need to say that this person is lying for attention,
Oh, a
and
lot
this
of people are
person.
saying it on
Right.
Twitter.
Well, now they
100%.
are,
A ton of
but
people are
I've
saying it.
seen plenty of people just coming to bat for it. You know what I mean? Just like going to bat for this kid
Yeah,
who
they're
they don't
idiots.
know. They know that this is hyperbolic. They know that this is an exaggeration. They know that the university actually did the wrong thing and didn't back up their faculty or their curriculum, quite frankly. Like this is a global art history history
or
curriculum
anything about
at a liberal
protecting.
institution.
Yeah,
Like we need to, like it needs to be taught. Like this is what we founded. This is why people come all over the world to go to American liberal arts institutions, because they create curriculums that are so global, and like we do, like we are the knowledge center. Okay, like they just kind of
this is
these,
so fucking bad.
there's like, yeah, there's just like an ethos, there's just this idea that, again, it's that famous Carl Sagan quote, right? Your ignorance is just as good as my knowledge. Like that's what people literally believe. So this student who has not read anything, they're in their 20s. I'm assuming since they're in their 20s, they have not read a book in their life. That's what I'm assuming. If you grew up in America and you're in your 20s right now, you probably have not read a book in your entire life. And they're going to sit here and claim that they know just as much as this person who spent years, probably decades studying this field. That's literally what the internet has empowered people to do. And not just, I guess not the internet, but social media specifically, empowered people to do this. And we're treating it like it's equal, like it's the same thing, that this person's uninformed opinion weighs just as much as this professor who's been studying this one tiny field for like decades. And it's incredibly asinine, but we all are sitting around like we don't know what to do. Oh, I don't know. It's a tough one. It's like, no, it's not tough. We know the answer. And clearly Fire knows the answer. And clearly the university knows the answer, because they're walking it back already with this crap. And it's just, we'll see what happens. So, but I would bet.
Yeah, I mean, like even the chapter of like the like Muslim group that has a
Affiliated
chapter
with
on
the
campus
school.
again. Yeah, like even some of their people who are on campus like have said some shit that the group has been like, yeah, we don't
Right.
agree with that.
Well, because
We
it's
think
it's
that's wrong.
so because it's so over the top, like it's so hyperbolic, it's so exaggerated that, like, this is when your comment about harm, like it's this
We're fragile.
exaggeration that we're harming people by showing images, that we're harming people by publishing books. Like it is an absurd exaggeration. Everybody who has a lick of sense knows this, but we have to keep pretending because otherwise people are going to yell at us online. And this, I think this university administration is walking it back already, because they thought there wouldn't be any consequences apart from the social consequences. Well, I think
Yeah, I
we're going to
wonder
see
how many
more of this.
followers their social media accounts lost.
I think they put it on private for a while because they were getting so much trolling and stuff over this.
Uh, I just stopped following all their journals.
Yeah, so I think they started
It's like, fuck you.
just being like, you can set the settings so people can just stop replying and stuff, because
Yeah.
you're getting hounded with trolls. I understand that, like people are DMing you death threat. Like, yeah, you're like, okay, I'm just gonna lock this so you can't just, strangers can't just start saying things to me, whatever.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, and of course, I think they're gonna walk. We're gonna see more of this, but I think it's also, we're gonna see more people like adjuncts
By a
suing through
university that probably
Fire.
won't survive for that much longer.
Right, and
Yeah.
I think it's only going to get worse. We're
So
going to
aren't they
see
like a
more of
small
this.
private institution? Like,
Yeah. Or I don't know, but probably I've never really heard of the university until this scandal. Hamline is
uh,
called Hamline University or something. I've
Hamline,
never.
yeah. I mean, they have Waterstone and Runestone.
Yeah, I don't know.
They're like have fairly notable writing undergrad programs. Like they're one of like
It's
the
a private
best
school, right?
like teachers, creative writing teachers supposedly at Towson, left Towson for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse in terms of adjuncts suing because of stuff like this, or even tenured faculty. Like I've heard even more horrific stories of people that were tenured track and or tenured, and they're getting treated like shit by the university
Oh
for
yeah.
something they said or did or taught or a book they assigned. It's really gotten insane. But I think it's going to get worse in terms of the people clamping down too. Like it's steadily increased as the years have gone on. Like students more emboldened,
Well,
faculty catering to the
Hamline is
students.
reviewing their policies on academic freedom
Yeah.
because their president is an asshole. She's an idiot.
And she's
Like,
clearly unqualified for the job.
yeah.
If this is the case, if this is how she's handling it, like she clearly doesn't
We
deserve
need
this
to
position.
rewrite the definition of academic freedom
Right.
because it can't be at the expense of what?
A student lying and saying they were offended. That's what. Yeah.
A student's feelings.
But it's not even like, that's the thing, is I don't even
Like
believe that student felt
you're
that. Yeah.
feeling, yeah, but I think that like even if it was what they felt, so you're gonna rewrite this policy because a student said they felt hurt by this image. in this particular context in which they didn't have to see it.
Yeah.
So why did you stay, is what I would ask.
Because they wanted to do this.
Why'd you sign up for this class? You're a
I bet
business major.
I bet the student is getting all kinds of. I bet they're getting job offers for
Oh,
doing
they're
this.
getting a lot
Yeah,
of hate though. A lot of
yeah,
people
you're
being
getting a
like,
lot of
you're
hate too.
you just, yeah, you're
I'm
clearly
sure.
unhireable. Like,
People saying that on
an
social media
idiot.
is one thing, but I bet they're getting
Yeah.
offers from places like, yeah, a lot of organizations that would hire somebody that's willing to lie or exaggerate or
Yeah.
really go so off the walls, be so unreasonable that we have to, like, you're made to look stupid if you're being reasonable. Like, you're not allowed to be reasonable in this context.
Yeah. It's,
There's a lot of organizations that would hire somebody like that.
yeah. Schools.
Yeah, well, yeah, most of them schools and or nonprofits affiliated with education or something like that.
Yeah. Schools did.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
Where even are we in the world? I only, like, I don't even, I realized like halfway through I didn't even know what state we were in anymore.
You mean like what? Like
And as I lay dying.
oh. In the book. And as I lay dying, I'm in Mississippi, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna guess. There we go. Mississippi. Thank God. But yeah, you know, one of those southern places that have a place called Jefferson.
Jefferson, yeah. I lived in Louisiana for several years. They have a Jefferson Davis Parish.
Everywhere has a Jefferson.
Yeah. Oh, well, and it is interesting, like, when I lived in the South, and I lived in a city in the South, but, you know, surrounded by the cities are the small towns and things like that. Like, it is a different world. And, like, living in that and experiencing it made me appreciate this Faulkner novel more. I know that's going to sound silly to people that are from that part of the country and stuff. They're like, well, of course, you know. I'm like, yeah, well, literally, if you're a city boy like me, like, you literally don't know it, like, until you go there and see it. Like,
It's literally like just a fiction to you.
yeah, exactly. It's like in a book, something in a book, and then you go there, and it's like, or it's something in a movie nowadays because people don't read books. But it's like you go there, and then you're like, oh, this is real, actually. Like,
People believe in God this much.
and of course, the context for this is like, you know, this is the Great Depression era, 1930.
Yeah.
This novel came out, so all that stuff is. So when you're poor and you're living in the rural area outside of major towns, and I think we're going to get to this in the discussion, listeners, but like those scenes when they go into town with the horse and cart, and everybody's coming up to them with the rags over their nose because of the smell, and it's like aliens coming into a different planet almost, right? These rural people that are barefoot, dirty, they have this dead body that's like in the back of the wagon that's stinking up the whole street because it's like over 2 weeks.
Yeah, they're basically
now.
a circus that isn't wanted.
Right, yeah. It's a spectacle. It's like to people that are not used to that or haven't lived that or seen it, right? Just as much as the city is a spectacle to people that lived outside of it or whatever. And I get, you know, this was a different time. These rural areas, while they still exist, have been dwindling for the last century, right? Like to non-existence. If anybody's ever driven through the South or even like just like a large state like Texas, what's I found most interesting about it is there's a lot of towns in Texas that existed during various booms, either the oil booms or the mining booms throughout that state. And then, you know, somewhere around the 80s, 70s, they started to become unincorporated towns, which means legally that the federal government really removed a post office from that city, so it's no longer recognized as a U.S. city because there aren't enough people living there. You know what I mean? One of the strangest things, and I mean, you can do this all over parts of America, you know, ghost towns and things like that are like tourist things, but it is unbelievable and I get saying this, it could be offensive, like, but because I'm coming from like an anthropological area, like kind of like an anthropological way, but yeah, it's incredible. All right, but we're gonna get to it. This is Heavy Board. I'm Andrew Wittstadt.
I'm a little gassy today.
And today we are doing William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying, one of the most famous American novels ever written. I think this winner of the Nobel Prize. And we have originally published in 1930, but we have two different versions of this. I have a vintage paperback that was published originally in 2004. And I think I have a weird one, though. I have, like, somehow on Amazon, I ended up getting, like, the British, like, the UK and Australian print for it. But it's available on Amazon. We'll link it down there, as always. And, Sophie, what did you have?
I actually have Norton Anthology of American Literature, Volume D, 8th edition. Happen to have the full text in there already.
Nice. Full text in there. That's actually... I didn't even realize that.
Yeah.
That's interesting that it's a full novel in the Norton text. It shows
Yeah, they had
listeners...
just expanded it to include more complete longer works. It
Right.
also had... I mean, yeah, a lot of these honestly aren't that long, but like, I mean, entire plays that they had in here.
Right.
I mean, they have all of my Antonia, which I would also like to read.
When was that published? The anthology.
This
Overall.
had to be...
Just for the book nerds. The book nerds listening in.
This has to be a while back. Let me double check.
I imagine early 2000s or something.
Yeah, 2012.
2012. Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know. They've probably put out an updated edition since
I'm
then.
sure.
But
I'm sure.
They just listeners
And you know
know.
that might have different, longer texts. It might have some of the same, but you know.
So that's the text, listeners. That's the book. Housekeeping. Reminder to listeners, we're still looking for workshop horror stories. If you have a workshop horror story and you want to share it with us, please send it to heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. You can contact us there as well. We also have a subscription plan. You can subscribe to this podcast at patreon.com/heavyboard to receive full uncensored episodes for subscribers only, bonus content, all that good stuff. If you can't afford that, don't want to do that, there are other ways you can support us. You can leave us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast. That helps us out. That helps us grow. You can check out, like, subscribe, share to any of our YouTube channels. That helps us out. That's a free way to support us. We appreciate it. And as always, you can find everything we cover in the description of this episode. And that's housekeeping.
All right.
Where do you want to start? We just do initial thoughts, impressions, time, what it was like to read this. Yeah. Go for it. So
This one made me feel really stupid. I had a really hard time at first, especially when it came to establishing, like, in my head, who the characters were. As you may know, this is a novel that's broken into many voices, right? So we switch between different characters' perspectives, and we get these monologues, or like sometimes their perspective on an interaction that happens. Sometimes we'll get things kind of out of order, like we'll learn that something has happened, and not until the next speaker do we actually learn the details of what happened.
right.
So there are lots of moments where it does feel a little bit jarring, or you feel... I felt ungrounded at first. That isn't to say it's not good. It's really good. I think part of me was a bitch because it's just not what I felt like reading. Like, I don't know. I was in the mood for garbage, I think. This isn't garbage, so... But... And also just, like, dialect can obviously be hard, written in a very different style than I'm accustomed to reading, so... Yeah, it gave me some difficulty. It's really, I would say, overall very sad.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I think it took a long time to feel like something was happening.
Yeah.
But again, I was also like kind of just like, I just like want something trashy, coming down off of Lana Del Rey. As like, give me trash.
And it's like, we talked about that. We haven't done a whole lot of modernist stuff, but with the stuff we have done with, like, I'm thinking the Virginia Woolf and things, like, we talked about how listeners could go back and listen to that, but like how the modernists, why are they so beloved by mostly college professors and things like that? Well, because they were like the last big innovative movement, and they purposely used every tool in the toolbox, like when they were writing something. So we talked about this a little bit with Virginia Woolf's stream of consciousness and things like that, the sentence structure, the little punctuation rules that are used to the author's advantage, to the text's advantage. They're using every tool in the toolbox to...
Yeah, well, and I think we also get a lot of, like, stuff that feels very in line with modernism in terms of some of the ideas that are presented. Even, like, I'm sure we'll talk about Addie's bit, but like when Addie is talking about words and words are like inadequate, like that was a big modernist idea, right?
Right.
Words are kind of inadequate to express what we mean.
Right.
Or did I make that up? Like, is that
No. I think it's in there. She's talking about in regards to faith with Cora in that
Yeah,
section, but it's
yeah.
same principle still applies there, yeah, to like modernist text. And then, yeah, because words, we've talked about this on some of our poetry episodes. This is the first time I guess we're bringing it up on fiction, or we did bring it up on fiction, I think, in our Joy Williams, with the kind of the limits of language. Language, we were like, oh, it's really free. Writing is ultimately free. It is, right? Because there is this ultimate freedom.
Well, and this
to
is
creating.
also like what every sort of movement in literature revolves around, is like what.
Yeah, where are the
I mean,
limits?
it sounds kind of dumb, but like, yeah, what is this movement's ideas about the limitations of language?
Right. Because it
And
is
how do they
limiting.
express it?
Because it can only go so far. It can only go so far, and the whole point of the art craft is to make it feel like it can go even further, right? Like that's the art of like literary writing, literary poetry type thing. But yeah, I remember, this isn't the first time I've read this book. This is the second time. I read it in undergrad for a class the first time, and I was in my 20s. And I had a lot of the issues the first read that Sophie described, where it's a little confusing. You just have to kind of keep reading because you don't quite understand how these characters match up. You even don't quite understand how they're related to one another until like halfway through the novel and all that. You just have to kind of keep going, and it starts to fall into place. And that makes it a little confusing. Second read for me, even like a decade later here, it was easier because I knew that kind of stuff going in. But yeah, first time reading some of this, and it, like, not like a difficult text, like it's not like he's using a lot of big words or structures.
I would still argue it's a fairly difficult text.
I'm trying to think, how would we describe how it's difficult? You know what I mean?
I mean,
it's
well, it's really
quite with
playful. I think, there's a lot of moments where we have like some of that kind
So
of
many
stream of
perspectives.
consciousness.
Yeah, so many
The perspectives, just
Yeah.
not being able, sort of suppressing what's happening by having characters alluding to what's
Right.
happening without telling you. So like, we know something's up. We know that they're referring to something that has happened, but we don't know what that thing is. Right. Gosh, what's like a good example? When Dewey Dell.
Yeah.
Throughout, keeps referring to how, oh gosh, he could help me. Darl could help me. She says that, right? It's Darl that she says could help her.
Yeah.
Over and over again. If he only knew, right? But we don't know what it is that he doesn't know, or that he could help her with, or what she's struggling with, or what's going on there. I was really confused about their relationship at first. I was like, oh, are they like in a thing? I was like, is that how this is gonna go?
Was it
like,
her
I
kid?
mean,
Was it
yeah.
Daryl that impregnated her?
Oh yeah. Well, I was
There's,
like
like,
wondering
that
that
implication.
early before I learned that she was pregnant,
Right.
right? Because it seems like they have this weird connection, but she does seem to say that it's the other guy, her man. But we also, and she's 17, and but we don't learn that until like the end, really. It's really not until the end that we learn that, and we get some of these allusions to something being that's going on with her, something she needs help with really early on, but we don't know what. And I'm sure you could guess at it, but it's really suppressed. I think it would be hard. I don't think I could have guessed.
Yeah, and it's revealed very masterfully in that, like, that it's so subtle and suppressed, but it gets slowly revealed as you keep
Yeah.
reading. I think that's the real mastery of somebody like Faulkner, somebody who we consider as like an American master. And he was incredibly prolific. He wrote a lot of novels. His two biggest ones are this one, As I Lay Dying, and then of course The Sound and the Fury are his two big ones that he wrote around the same time here in the 30s, early 30s. But yeah, I mean, so you just know that it's that kind of thing. What was I going to say? Okay, so we talked about that, the setup, all that good stuff. For me, reading through, like, I told Sophie this, I was texting her, like, I was almost hypnotized. Like, I read this in, like, 2 sittings, basically. And I just kind of blew through it. Like, the way it kind of drew me through. I don't know, there's just something about, like, great literature that even if it's, like, not a great story, it, like, pulls you through the work quickly. Like, it, like, propels you through it.
Well, and the
I was
writing
telling-
itself is interesting, you know?
Yeah. Like I was saying, I've noticed this about some of, the greats, lesser works. If you read what we call great writers and stuff, the Hemingways, the Virginia Woolfs, if you read their, like, lesser works, like their lesser known stuff that, just isn't quite as good as their masterpieces type thing, the stories aren't as good as their masterpieces, but they still kind of pull you through them. There's something about these there's a quality in these kind of more literary
Well, there are
works.
a lot of elements, I think, that do that. One is just, like, the need to, like, know, to be able to, like, pull all of these strings together and understand how they interconnect. Because otherwise you put the book down and you have all these loose ends and you're like, well, what about that thing?
Right.
What is up with Vardaman? Which we'll get to.
Yeah. Vardaman, dude.
But yeah, I mean, like, there, even the fact that something I don't think I really thought about as I was reading, but after the fact, is that, like, we have these, like, they refer to themselves as, like, country people, right? Presumably, like, not highly educated. One of our big speakers throughout the book speaks almost as though he, like, is. Right? I would say that Darrell speaks in a way that is maybe surprising given the way everyone else around him speaks. It's not entirely, like, at odds with it, but, and the book refers to Darrell being strange again and again, right? People think Darrell is a strange guy. So I'm kind of curious about that, but and I think a lot of really strong writers know how to do that well also, especially when you're dealing with something like, for instance, a child character.
Yeah, and Darrell, I like that you bring that up because Darrell, I think, is the one we get the most of. We get his perspective the most.
Yeah.
Darrell, yeah.
Darrell.
Yeah. My first question is, what is it about these small rural town folk? Like, why small towns? Why are we drawn to that? Why are writers drawn to that? We talked about this a little bit last episode on kind of like the city versus rural novel, because that article came out or whatever that we glanced at, and we're just theorizing.
I think there could be a few reasons. One, I think if you grow up around it and you leave it, that's probably a big motivation to write about something like that. Just seeing that massive difference, right? Because he does, even throughout this story, create, like, an interplay between the country folk and the town folk and how they feel about each other. Right?
Which I'm sure was a big part of his life, because he came from rural Mississippi, and, like, then he was a big, in the 30s, after his big hits here, like As I Lay Dying, he was a screenwriter. He wrote for Hollywood. There's, like, I think he only did that for like a decade before he got sick of it, but I'm sure he made a lot of money doing that, and then, like, kind of went back to his rural.
But also just being in such a small world. right?
That and I personally am drawn to kind of there's something it might sound of like bad to people living in rural, but it's like there's something mythic about a small town as opposed to a city, right? Because a city, it feels like it's been all discovered. There's like all these things that are there, but like
I
there's
think it
something
also
mythic
takes us
hidden.
back to like this idea of like the American prairie,
Right,
know?
maybe this
Like,
frontier,
there's-
exploring the frontier. Maybe that's why I said it could be offensive to somebody that's like grew up in the rural, like fuck you, city people. But like, I think that's there. I think that is like,
Or
like
just
the
a
frontier
sense
expansion. Yeah,
also something that we
Exploring.
didn't grow up with. So there is, I think, a curiosity there, right? Anyone
Yeah.
who doesn't grow up in this is like, what is that? Like, or even, I think, I don't know. I think writers have different motivations for being drawn to it, and readers do too.
sure.
But it's definitely a landscape that, like any, I would say, has a lot to delve into and to look at and to, like, just some of the, especially like when it comes to like farming, right?
Yeah. There's like a fantasy about that. It's interesting too. Like there's like that homesteading fantasy. There's like this kind of like living off the land fantasy that people
Yeah.
have in a kind of our modern world where like we go into a grocery store, we don't have to farm and slaughter the pig ourselves. We just buy the smoked bacon in the package, There's like that kind of aspect to it, but I'm always thinking more of like, the same reason I really like the Coen brothers, not just because I think they're good directors and writers, but like this kind of like, their first, all their hits, all their really big hits, the Coen brothers movies, anybody that's a movie fan knows what I'm talking about. Like they were small town kind of stories. Like I'm thinking like their first big hit, Blood Simple, right, in the 80s, where it's like this small Texas town where like this little lie kind of blows up into this huge thing and it causes all this controversy. And it's like, there's something mythical about these kind of like, it's almost like a secret, like you're uncovering a secret, maybe is what I'm trying to get
Well,
at. Like,
yeah,
it's like this
I
hidden
think it's-
world from most people. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Sorry.
and the place itself is like, I mean, this feels obnoxious to say because I'm sure we all like read A Streetcar Named Desire and had the discussion about how the city was a character itself. But like it does,
Oh, yeah.
it is that way. Like it is you begin to understand the place as having a certain character. It is like its own small universe where everyone in it has the same sort of I don't know, beliefs and motivations and way of life.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, there's just something that draws me to it too. I was texting Sophie about this. I kept reminding. I mean, I'm sure Larry McMurtry was a big fan of Faulkner. This kind of like the rural kind of cowboy novel type thing that was very popular, like in the 50s, 60s, 70s in America, at least, right? This kind of romanticizing the old West and these small towns and all that, especially as they were crumbling. Like these towns grew up and then they lived for 100 years because of some boom. I live in a state where there's a lot of that. There were, our capital, Carson City in Nevada here. It was originally the capital because Vegas didn't fucking exist, okay? Like Vegas was not like a city then. Like Carson City was like the middle of the state. It was the center of the mining industry. That mining industry has broken down. It's become industrialized to the point where it's just a few big companies that mine all over the state, so they don't need to be in Carson City. And then, the gambling industry sprung up in Vegas, and now Vegas is the largest city in the state. So it is this kind of weird, like, especially in these kind of western or southern states, like the later expansion of the United States, there's just something to it. I don't know, like this kind of like, one of the big tourism things here are the ghost towns. There are towns that are less than 100 people, right? Like I said, driving through Texas is even just driving through it, like, is an educational experience if you haven't experienced that kind of like driving from a town where there's like literally like 300 people living in it to a huge city like Dallas, and it's it's only a couple 100 miles outside of Dallas or something where there's millions of people. and just how radically different the two worlds are.
Well, yeah, there's also like this sense of it being a world that's really insular, even though
It
there's
is, yeah.
like, even in the book, it's like there's, even though there is ultimately like a way out, it's like there's no way out. But yeah, I think
Yeah, the kind of victim of circumstance kind of aspect.
yeah, well,
We've talked about this on a
victim of
couple
a lot
different
of
episodes.
shit, and seemingly a victim of a lot of shit if you're Ance Bundren, or at least or so he seems to think.
Yeah, what do we think of Ants? That's one of my questions.
Such a little piece of shit.
Yeah.
Such a fuck. I mean, he sucks.
And Ants is
we
like
don't
the
hear from
father.
him, right?
Yeah.
So we only see and hear him sort of secondhand through other characters through most of the book. It starts with Darl. He hears who we learn to be his older brother sawing. Right? And this is really recurrent also throughout. They keep hearing the saw.
Yeah.
And we learn that Addie Bundren, he's making a box for Addie Bundren to lie in. Addie Bundren is his mother, or their mother, and the box he's making, obviously a coffin.
Yeah. Well, I just mean like
they don't refer to it as a coffin for a while.
yeah. You learn Cash, the oldest son, is busy making a coffin. Then you learn throughout the book that he's actually quite a capable carpenter. Like locally, people contract him, and that's how he makes money. Is he'll like build stuff and fix roofs for people, that kind of stuff. But I mean, just like Ants as a character, like yeah, we get Ants Bundren, who's like the father figure of this kind of rural family. That's you learn as you read the book, you learn that it's kind of messed up, And then Ants Bundren is
I'm
kind of
just trying to figure out where we first learn about ants.
Ants is like perspective. And
We don't get
mine is-
Ants' perspective until late, I would say, in the book.
Page 29 on my copy is his first chapter. But it's short, and I think
It's
he has very brief kind of like you kind of get inside his head a minute or two, and it's usually after we saw the events take place in another character's section, usually
Right.
Darl
So I'm
or,
saying, like, what is the first image of ants we get? I don't know what it is, but basically we get not a very kind
I think
view
Tull.
of who he is.
I think Tull. That I don't know if I forget who Tull is, but he's on page 23.
Tull,
at least
Vernon
in the
Tull.
first-
Vernon Tull is Cora Tull's husband and
Husband,
neighbor,
right.
and the neighbor to the Bundrens.
But he's the first one. Like Tull is the first one to show skepticism, right? Like the first two chapters where we have Cora and Daryl and Jewel, and like these kind of brothers, and Cora the neighbor. But then we get like Tull is kind of telling us how Ants is, right? Like, well, he's like saying, Ants doesn't have a lick of sense type
Yeah,
thing.
and Cora's kind of stupid.
Cora's kind of like a typical kind of Baptist Southern girl. If anybody's ever met them, they're just like very religious, devoutly religious. When people are arguing or something, she'll just start like singing hymnals and stuff to like get them to stop arguing. Kind of all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean...
But we
It
learn that he's
just
this kind of
seems-
incredible selfish. Like Ants is incredibly
Yeah.
selfish. He's not very smart. He's also very like kind of, as throughout the novel we get a few characters that come in just a little bit. So Tull is one that comes in just a little bit. Peabody, the doctor, kind of neighbor that comes and like
Fat
kind of takes
doctor.
care of the rural counties, medical needs. He kind of travels through by horse to all these different farms that are far away from him. Who else am I thinking of that's there? Whitfield is like a neighbor from
Whitfield,
another county that like,
Sampson.
and all of those people, what they all have in common is they all talk about how like Ants Bundren ain't got no sense, right? Like Ants
Yeah.
Bundren ain't got no sense. What's he doing over
And
there?
what's he doing trying... So the whole... I mean...
And Ants keeps
Yeah.
going like, no man mislikes it more than me, he says. He's like,
Yeah, well, he keeps making decisions that are not in his or his family's best interest. I mean, basically, it's already kind of insane. So, like, you know, as an outsider in the time that we live in, reading a story in which someone is building a coffin for someone who is not yet dead.
And Tull,
Right.
this section in Tull's here is like he's talking to Ants and he's describing his conversation with Ants, and he's talking about, like Sophie said, the first couple pages we learn that somebody's dying. We don't quite know who yet, but we kind of get, they're hinting towards the mother of the family is dying slowly. But he's talking about moving the body, because the whole point of the story, as we said, is that Addie's dies, and then they need to get her body to Jefferson, which is a day's ride away, and then there's all this stuff that happens that prevents them from getting there quickly. But like, so Ants says to Tull, she'll want to get started right off, he says. It's far enough to Jefferson at best. He's like, but the roads is good now, I say. It's fixin' to rain tonight, too. His folks buries at New Hope, too. Not 3 miles away, but it's just like him to marry a woman born a day's hard ride away and have her die on him. He looks over the land, rubbing his knees. No man mislikes it. No man so mislikes it, he says. Sorry, I keep fucking up this because of the dialect. Like Sophie said, it's not a normal dialect. It's kind of like a country twang dialect. And I'm actually fighting to not read it in an accent, like a bad Mississippi accent. I don't know Mississippi accents as well as I know, like, that's one thing too, living in like an area that I didn't grow up in for a few years in Louisiana there. Like I started to learn the difference between a Texas accent and a Louisiana accent, which I just assumed they were all Southern before kind of thing. Didn't live close enough to Mississippi to pick up on that, but I knew a few people from there. But yeah, there's like a very distinct regional accents, like no man so mislikes it, he says.
I am a luckless man.
Yeah. She's a going, he says. Her mind is set on it. It's a hard life on a woman, for a fact. Some women. I mind my mammy lived to be 70 and more. Worked every day, rain or shine. Never a sick day since her last chap was born, until one day she kind of looked around her, and then she went and taken that lace-trimmed nightgown she had 45 years and never wore out of the chest, and put it on and lay down on the bed and pulled the covers up and shut her eyes. You all will have to look out for Pa the best you can, she said. I'm tired. Sorry for the accent.
It's hard not to.
Yeah, dude, but as I was reading, like, it works better if you throw in the accent too. Like, you get to hear the dialect type thing. And you know, we haven't really talked about that because we really haven't done any of like the kind of like late 19th century, early 20th century realism thing. I guess we should throw a few books on the list from there. You know, but I remember reading one in a class in undergrad that was like from like the late 1800s, you know, and I just remember being like, this is fucking, like, if I don't read this out loud, I do not understand it. You know, there are parts of even like, yeah, you know, some Mark Twain books and stuff where you don't understand them unless you're reading out loud. With kind of this realism craze that happened at that time, and we haven't really talked about it, but I guess we'll add some to the list. But yeah, dude, Ants is basically a piece of shit, and they don't say that right away. They kind of make you think he's kind of dumb and doesn't know better and is doing his best, and then you learn later on as it progresses and it gets steadily worse and worse that like, oh wow, this guy's a terrible father, all his children hate him, like he's a piece of shit and he doesn't care, and
his wife hated him.
Yeah, his wife hated him and cheated on him.
And his neighbors hate him. And
yeah,
like,
his
everyone
neighbors
kind
hate
of
him.
just hates him.
Yeah,
because he's a bad guy.
Yeah. And everybody knows that Ants Budrin is cheap and poor and is going to swindle you in a deal, and don't trade with him. And
like he just makes his family work a lot.
And he doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah.
And he doesn't do shit.
Yeah. Because to break out a sweat would make him sick. Let's say in the first couple of chapters.
Yeah, that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, he just sucks.
And one of the things that confused the shit out of me was that Daryl's like kept coming back to that kind of
Daryl.
Yeah, was
Yeah,
type
that didn't.
Of was. I was like, what the fuck is this guy saying? Like,
Yeah, it was confusing. I was. Hang on, let me. I gotta find it.
I think I marked it. It's in one of the Daryl. I marked page 88, but let me check. Because I think he brings it up a few times, but I think by page 88 in my copy, I was like, all right, what the fuck is he saying here?
Yeah. Well, and by that point, we had also had a lot from Vardaman, hadn't
Yeah.
we?
and it's actually in Vardaman's chapter that we get this, and I guess it's supposed to show Vardaman being confused by it, because that's where I marked it, because I think I was at that point. Because yeah, we were in a Daryl chapter that's just very short, then we go to a short Vardaman chapter, then back to Daryl. So it's like these two, it's like an interaction happening between these characters, and then we're jumping back and forth between their perspective. And Vardaman's supposed to be the youngest brother. He's like, we don't really know. Sophie and I talked like he doesn't really know. We don't really know how old Vardaman is. We assume he's under like 10. Like,
but we don't actually. Yeah, by the end of this, I didn't. By the end of this, I felt like, okay. Also, it seems like other people see him as strange. But there are moments when I feel like maybe he does seem like maybe he is older than 10. I don't know. It goes... Cash is the oldest. Then we have Darl. And then there's like a big gap?
Then there's a big gap. Then there's Jewel. And Jewel was the one that wasn't Ance's son.
There's like a 10-year gap, right?
Yeah.
And then there's Jewel.
And then Dewey Dell and Vardaman.
Dewey Dell and Vardaman.
I think Dewey Dell's the soul
girl. And it sort of
girl.
suggested that they all came in sort of quick succession. And Dewey Dell is 17.
Except Jewel. I think Jewel was the one that, like, because she cheated on Ance with Whitfield. And Jewel, that's why there's like this tension between Jewel and Ance. They play up right from the beginning, you know, and really between Jewel and everybody else in the family. Yeah. And he kind of keeps to himself. Like, he bought his own horse. Like, he was like, we learn eventually that he was like lying about this one thing so he could go cut a field in the middle of the night to save up money for himself to buy himself a horse. And like, Ance got all pissed at him for that. And then, yeah, then we have like Dewey Dell and Vardaman, which are like the younger two. And I guess we don't really know how old Vardaman is, but like from this, Sophie was like from the text of Vardaman, we're like, is this kid like retarded or something?
There's something going on. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like something going on with Vardaman. Yeah. I mean, his sentences, I think, do not. The sentences suggest that something's up there. I feel like, especially like closer to the end, it starts to get really.
Here's like I say. Here, let me read a confusing section from this, and
I'm looking for a good one.
There's this part where Vardaman starts, after his mother dies, he starts to say his mother is a fish. And I think, if I had to guess, Faulkner's trying to show us a younger kid's rationalization of his mother's death.
Sure. Right? That's how he's dealing with grief.
Right. So he keeps calling his mother a fish throughout the novel. And this is almost halfway here. But he says, but my mother is a fish. Vernon's seen it. He was there. Jewel's mother is a horse, Darrell said. Then mine can be a fish, can it, Darrell? I said. Jewel is my brother. Then mine will have to be a horse, too, I said. Why? Darrell said. If Pa's your Pa, why does your Ma have to be a horse just 'cause Jules is? Why does it? I said. Why does it, Darrell? Darrell is my brother. Then what is your Ma, Darrell? I said. And he said, I haven't got her one, Darrell said, because if I had one, it is was. And if it is was, it can't be is, can it? No, I said. Then I am not, Darrell said. Am I? No, I said. I am. Darrell is my brother. But you are, Darrell, I said. I know it, Darrell said. That's why I'm not it. That's why I am not is. Are is too many for one woman to fall. Like, that's literally a dialogue exchange and kind of an internal exchange between Vardaman and Darrell. And I was just so confused by the time I got to the end of it. I was like, what the fuck are they talking about?
Yeah, he starts to repeat, like, this person, my brother, Darrell is my brother. Like, toward the end, that happens a lot.
And I was like, what the fuck
he also,
is going on?
He doesn't seem to understand, too, that, like, they're going to town, and as they're going to town, he keeps bringing up this train that he wants that, I guess, maybe the shopkeeper promised he wouldn't sell.
I think he saw... I kind of was confused by that too. I think it's like a mention of something they saw last time they were in town, and they said he couldn't have it till Christmas. Maybe Santa would bring it because obviously they're poor; they can't afford toys and stuff for Christmas like this.
Yeah,
and like, you know, this is the beginning of the Great Depression era too, right? 1930. This is like supposed to reflect that everybody's going hard times now. You know, especially if you lived in the rural farming communities, and it's just like, yeah, I don't get it. I mean, you know, whatever. You don't have to get every aspect because it still works overall as a whole. But yeah, like Vardaman was always a puzzling aspect
Yeah,
to this.
and it doesn't have to be. I'm just gonna say kindly like neurodivergent. You know, like it could be,
Mild Asperger's, dude.
I mean, he could be somewhere on the spectrum. It could be like, some
Neurologically
kind
atypical,
of,
dude. Neurologically
yeah,
atypical.
yeah. I mean, but like truly, we don't know. Like we don't quite
Yeah.
know what's up there.
Yeah. Ants his teeth, dude.
Oh yeah, that was interesting.
The whole
And that's
book,
a whole
he's just
toothless, gummy.
yeah, and he's talking about how he's been wanting to get his teeth fixed for like a decade. And again, keep
Yeah.
in mind this is 1930s, so like kind of oral hygiene was not normal. Like us
And
flossing
also,
and
like
brushing
getting
daily.
your teeth
yeah.
fixed here means dentures.
Yeah, getting a set of dentures. But still, even dentures, dentures are painful if they're not molded to your mouth right. And back in the day, I don't know what they used in the 30s for dentures, but now they're much more. You can actually get them implanted in your face, in your head too, so you don't have to take them out all the time. Because I remember my grandparents having like kind of old school dentures where you like had to take them out when you slept and shit.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah,
now they
so-
have like implants and shit. Modern technology.
Yeah. But in terms of like, yeah, I mean, there's a good bit about ants that comes from Samson, who is, I'm not sure.
Well, I think
Someone-
Samson shows up during the funeral, right? When all the people are coming through.
Is that what it is? Is it a funeral? Like, I don't know. I
It's
was
kind
real
of like
confused.
it's kind of like a message was shown, and Addie died, so a bunch of people kind of it's a rural area, so your neighbors
So
are
they
like
just come to
miles
the house.
away.
Is that what he's... Okay, so I was really
Yeah.
confused because they refer to the funeral. I was like, wait, did they already go to town and like come back? Like I thought that
Or
was
no,
the whole
no.
story.
Samson, I think, is okay. So Samson, the first one of Samson, I guess, is page 96. And I think this is right when they're taking the wagon and they're taking
Mm-hmm.
it from the house. So this is after the kind of funeral or viewing type thing.
Yeah, but there was someone else who
And I think Samson was at
mentions
both.
the funeral. No, he does. Quick,
Yeah.
he says, but Quick had been to the funeral 3 days ago, and we naturally never thought anything about it except that they were heading away from home mighty late,
Yeah.
and that they hadn't heard about the bridge.
It's Bundren from down beyond New Hope, Quick says. There's one of them Snopes horses Jules riding. I don't know there was e'er one on that. I didn't know there was e'er one of them horses left, McCollum says. I thought you folks down there finally contrived to get them all away. Try and get that one, Quick says. The wagon went on. I bet old man Lon never give it to him, I says. No, Quick says. He bought it from Pappy. The wagon went on. They must not have heard about the bridge, he says. What are they doing up there anyway, McCollum says. Taking a holiday since he got his wife buried, I reckon, Quick says. Heading for town, I reckon, with Toll's Bridge gone too. I wonder if they ain't heard about the bridge. And that's like the whole big event in the novel is they're trying to get her to Jefferson, Mississippi, which is a day's ride away, right? No cars. There were cars existed, but poor people couldn't afford them. And then there's this bridge in this river that it rains, and if anybody that's from the South or lived in the deep South,
it's basically
it
flooded.
rains all the time and bridges flood out all the time. And this one is one that was built, in the late 1800s, and it's been washed out by a heavy storm, and they have to get this wagon with a dead body and the 5 of their family over it, and that's where all kind of the shit takes a turn for the worse. But yeah, Samson kind of is watching them from the porch as they kind of come up to the bridges. His house.
So, and this is what I mean where you get kind of confused. First of all, one, for me, didn't understand what a funeral meant in this circumstance. So I was really confused about where we were in time because I was like, wait, did they already bury her? Right? Because how I understand a funeral is it's the whole burial thing. Obviously not the only way, but
And if you don't embalm them, they start stinking within a day.
So
and back
obviously,
then,
so
they
there's
didn't
this
have a
whole
coroner,
thing.
yeah.
Basically, they're hurrying to try to get this coffin built so that when she dies, see, that's the disturbing thing, though, right? I think it's supposed to be that she's on her deathbed watching her son, essentially, or listening to her son build her a coffin.
Yeah.
But there's also the sense that she's decided to die, which is
Right,
also
yeah.
confusing. But basically the doctor comes, as we learn, the fat doctor who does not want to have to ride up or walk up the hill because there's no horse available to him.
Right. And
but
no
he-
roads.
Yeah.
So they tow him up with a rope in the rain, right? Like he's like walking up this thing with a rope tied around his fat stomach.
Yeah.
With that, and then ants, like they forget about it at one point, and it's like, yeah, that's what I mean. It's kind of country bumpkin, like very. You only see this in very rural like areas type stuff. You
Yeah,
know?
I feel like there are things I missed, but basically, yeah, he shows up and Addie like immediately dies.
Yeah.
And
Like,
so at first Vardaman also thinks that the doctor killed her.
right. And the doctor's kind of frustrated.
And this
'cause
is all
he's like-
happening right when I guess Vardaman had like caught a fish or killed a fish, or he was like in the process of maybe gutting a fish. Like I don't
Yeah.
fucking know.
He had gutted that fish that they told
He
him to
gutted
gut
a
for
fish.
dinner.
Yeah. And he goes through this whole thing about the fish being not fish now. Like and then the fish being his mother. Oh God, Vardaman and the fish.
Kind of religious, you would say, like the flesh and blood, right? Like the loaves, and you could talk about the kind of, and there was a lot. People always talk about what is the Odyssey or whatever one of those
But this
old-ass
like
books.
part stuck in my head. I was like, I can't get past this bit. I was like, oh, this is kind of great. Vardaman
The
talking
fish?
about the fish and like trying to rationalize in his mind, and
It is one of the most artistic parts in the book, like the Vardaman sections. Maybe that's why there's such fascination around them. Not only because they're a little confusing and maybe a little out of place with the rest of the characters, but maybe because Faulkner might take the most artistic liberty with that. Like Sophie said, with this kind of fish imagery, with this kind of, Vardaman's confusion, being a younger child, not quite understanding the permanence of death.
Yeah, and at
But he
points,
also
like, all,
does.
punctuation will disappear.
I always
Then
say,
I
man,
begin to run. I run toward the back and come to the edge of the porch and stop. Then I begin to cry. I can feel where the fish was in the dust. It is cut up into pieces of not fish now, not blood on my hands and overalls. Then it wasn't so. It hadn't happened then. And now she is getting so far ahead I can't catch her.
and that's the doctor is pissed because he said by the time Ants called him, he says in his chapter, he's like, well, Ants is telling me that she needs a doctor, so that means she's too far gone because Ants is an idiot. And he'd only call me
we
when it's
learned
too
that he
far.
didn't want to. Yeah, and we learned that he didn't even want to pay for a doctor, right? Like he just didn't, and he had put it off, and he had said, "Nah, we don't need to get a doctor
For the $3, yeah.
Yeah, he is just a total asshole. But yeah, and Vardaman is like talking about. Yeah, I can hear the bed and her face and them, and I can feel the floor shake when he walks on it. That came and did it. That came and did it when she was all right, but he came and did it. Yeah, there's also like one of the first things I noticed was like the use of pronouns before like who that who that pronoun refers to.
Right.
That'll happen a lot throughout this book. So like even here, it took me a minute. It took me until the line, "the fat son of a bitch." When Vardaman says "the fat son of a bitch," that I know that we're talking about the doctor.
Yeah, Peabody.
It took me a while to put that together. And I think smarter people than me could have figured out that he came and then he did it. Could have alluded to him, right? Because she has just died. The doctor just showed up.
Yeah. And it really is like a tragedy, right? Like the mother's calling for Jewel, Addie's calling for Jewel, and she's about to die. Like,
Yeah, what's
but
the sense
Jewel
that you
is-
have of Addie, though,
Well, I didn't have much,
before
but hold on, I gotta pee real quick, and then I want to
Yeah,
talk
so
about
do
her
I, actually.
chapter. Yeah,
P-Brick?
Toll's Bridge gone too. Wonder if they ain't heard about the bridge. They'll have to fly then, I says. I don't reckon there's e'er a bridge between here and mouth of Ishawada. Ishitawa.
The fat son of a bitch.
But yeah,
See,
dude.
it's a line like that makes me think like not, a 9-year-old. And then we get, I jump from the porch running. The top of the barn comes swooping up out of the twilight. If I jump, I can go through it like the pink lady in the circus into this warm smelling without having to wait into the warm smelling. My hands grab at the bushes. Beneath my feet, the rocks and dirt go rubbling down. Then I can breathe again, and the warm smelling. I enter the stall, trying to touch him, and then I can cry. Then I vomit the crying. As soon as he gets through kicking, I can, and then I can cry. The crying can. Like, it gets really playful, I would say.
That's why I say it's like his most
Vardaman.
artistic sections are the Vardaman sections, where he's fucking not just with the syntax, but he's fucking with the way of like logic, the way you would see with the speech. And he's kind of dressing it up, and it dresses it up in a way where it gives the character more depth while having this minor character who doesn't really have a lot of drama involved in the role. You know, his chapters are pretty short. He's just there as like a little artistic choice. And I guess that's why. But, you know. But Addie, dude.
Yeah, so that's what I was asking.
What do we think of Addie?
Well, so they're what we think of Addie before and after her little piece. Don't think much of her at the beginning. Don't really have any ideas about her, but we do kind of get her painted in this like, well, she's decided.
Right.
She's decided to die, right? Like, it's interesting that that is like a weird stance to take. She's decided to die. I've seen it before. You know, like, and that's basically what the doctor says, right? I've seen it before.
And in her chapter might be the most revealing.
But at the
about
same time
family.
is saying like, oh, it's too late. At the same time, also blaming ants, but also blaming her. So I think that was kind of confusing and interesting. That she was insisting on being buried with her family when that would cause like such a fucking thing. I think is kind of crazy. Right. That's just me, you know. I can kind of understand it, but at the same time, in these circumstances, it does seem kind of strange.
Well, that and the idea, and again, this gets back to kind of Faulkner. I mean, you know, you guys don't have to take our word for it. Faulkner is considered one of the best American writers ever. But I thought it was an interesting choice that we don't get this kind of full picture of Addie until well after her death, and they're like in the bridge here, and all this is going down, and like all this stuff is happening.
And she's already stinking.
Yeah, and she's already dead and stinking in the coffin, kind of getting waterlogged because it's in that flooded bridge and stuff. And she like that for just that first paragraph of her section, and this is page 153 in my version, so it's like over halfway through the novel here. In the afternoon when school was out and the last one had left with his little dirty snuffling nose, instead of going home, I would go down the hill to the spring where I could be quiet and hate them. It would be quiet there then, with the water bubbling up and away and the sun slanting quiet in the trees and the quiet smelling of damp and rotting leaves and new earth, especially in the early spring, for it was worse then. Like, that's like, just like, she starts talking about how she kind of hated being a mother, like in this time.
Yeah, and hated everything about it.
And then how,
she seemed to hate being pregnant. She seemed to hate... I mean, I think it was maybe suggested that she hated being pregnant, but I'm only sort of inferring that from her sort of sense of, like, I couldn't be alone. I had a human inside of me. And then I also had my husband.
Yeah, and how she just kind of took ants. She keeps saying, so I took ants. When she's talking about, like, you know, choosing a husband back then, right? Like, kind of whatever passed through in your town.
He would pass the schoolhouse, the wagon creaking slow, his head turning slow to watch the door of the schoolhouse as the wagon passed. One day I went to the door and stood there when he passed. When he saw me, he looked quickly away and did not look back again.
Yeah, how they met, and he was like always passing through, and then she learned that he would go out of his way to pass the schoolhouse so he could see her. And then she's like, so I took ants. And when I knew that I had cash, I knew that living was terrible and that this was the answer to it.
She was in school. She was school age.
Oh, she was in school?
I mean, that's how it sounds, right?
Right. Okay.
Like, I mean...
Right. Which was the norm. I mean, come on. We're talking
a
like...
tall man and young, so that he looked already like a tall bird hunched in the cold weather on his wagon seat.
And then,
I mean, she's saying she went to the door of the schoolhouse, I assume. And stood there.
Yeah. So I took ants, but then like a little bit later where she starts talking about like that. So I took ants, and when I knew that I had cash, I knew that living was terrible and that this was the answer to it. That was when I learned that words are no good, that words don't ever fit even when they are trying to say at it. When he was born, I knew that motherhood was invented by someone who had to have a word for it because the ones that had the children didn't care whether there was a word for it or not. I knew that the fear was invented by someone that had never had the fear, pride who never had the pride. I knew that it had been, not that they had dirty noses, but that we had to use one another by words like spiders dangling by their mouths from a beam, swinging and twisting and never touching, and that only through the blows of the switch could my blood and their blood flow as one stream. So like we get into this kind of religious context, but then also this idea of like we already mentioned like the words, right? Like Addie's this character that only shows up once. This is the only appearance of Addie in the entire book besides her like laying there dying through everybody else's perspectives. But this is the only time we get like her perspective. And it's talking about ants, right? He had a word too, love, he called it. But I had been used to words for a long time. I knew that word was like the others, just a shape to fill a lack. That when the right time came, you wouldn't need a word for that any more than for pride or fear. Cash did not need to say it to me, nor I to him, and I would say, let ants use it if he wants to, so that it was ants or love or ants. It didn't matter.
Yeah, let's keep in mind she also looked forward to whipping her children because she hated them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is interesting. It also kind of made me hate her, but I pity her, you know,
Right.
as someone who realistically doesn't have other options. I mean, maybe does, but like I imagine very limited in terms of what is expected of a woman in a small town.
Right.
She sort of presents it even as a choice she made, but then sort of becomes really, really resentful really quickly. I didn't have a very positive view of Addie before this moment. But I don't think this moment changed it much for me, actually.
No.
Like, I think I sort of felt maybe a little bit more at odds. I was more confused by her as a character and how bad to feel about her. Because I think somewhere in the middle, I kind of started to feel very sympathetic to her. And there is something in me that still feels sympathetic to her because like, yeah, you're a woman. You're like sort of in a position where there's no other option for you except to have a family.
And this is where it really builds the kind of domestic drama type stuff that we see in a lot of literary novels, like with Addie laying down the fact that there was infidelity, that on some level she feels like Ants knows, kind of, that Jewel isn't his son kind of thing.
That does make her, I think, a little, I don't know, maybe it is. I keep going back and forth on whether or not I find her to be a very empathetic.
I liked Addie.
A character I can empathize with very well.
I liked Addie, and I liked it for this. This is the very last paragraph of her section, page 160 in my version, right before we get Whitfield, Jewel's father's version of it. She says in the last paragraph of her section, "One day I was talking to Cora. She prayed for me because she believed I was so blind to sin, wanting me to kneel and pray too, because people to whom sin is just a matter of words, to them salvation is just words too." And it's just like that ends her entire contribution. Salvation and sin. To them salvation is just words too.
Yeah, but it becomes clear in this chapter also. Like, I think maybe I don't know how I feel about her. I think something in me changed toward her after this, but I don't know what it was. I don't really remember. But I do remember being increasingly angrier at Ants throughout this. Like, he is the one who ultimately, I think, takes all the heat from me. I think, I don't know. Yeah. But Addie's a bitch, too. She's kind of a dick. She does seem a little more motherly, but not by a whole lot. Not by a ton.
Yeah. But I do
And,
like the
can we
idea.
blame her?
Whereas, like, like a lot of big hits. So think of all the big literary hits. And I think this is part of why Faulkner was so famous. And a lot of these guys that write rural stuff is because before that, right, we mostly had what we call now is kind of the city novel, right? So we had domestic dramas, but they took place in like Jane Austen level, where it's like upper class, rich folks in a nice manor house or in a nice city house, Edith Wharton style, And this is a domestic drama set in the poor South, rural South kind of thing. And, that was a new thing at the time, kind of, with these there was mostly city novels because, again, most educated people were living in cities at the time. Most people that could read and write were living in cities at the time. But, like, and this is kind of like, it's the same type of deal, right, with cheating parents or people falling out of love and like the siblings fighting, whatever it is, kind of domestic drama, the tropes of domestic drama. And then it's taking that and setting it in small town rural America in the 1930s is kind of like the innovation, like not just like the style of how he told it here and like his style and all that, but like the actual kind of archetype, if we're talking story kind of. But yeah, I liked it. I thought, and I think Addie's chapter, clearly it was strategic to have one chapter of her. It's one of the longer perspective chapters, and it's all about her just talking about words, basically. And then she kind of gives us, like, what happened with Jewel and all that, like, and how she tried to get over it, and how she tried to, like, correct it.
And we get a piece of that. We don't get the whole thing. We just get a piece of it. And then we get the rest of the story from Whitfield. But yeah, we pity her. I don't particularly like her, I do pity her. I think I sympathize with her. I don't think she's the most sympathetic character.
Yeah, and I know we're running out of time now, but it's like, did you want to hit Dewey Dell at all, the pregnancy? Because I wanted to hit Dewey Dell, because Dewey Dell was one of my favorite characters. I was telling Sophie as we were like reading through this that my two favorite characters for some reason, Cash and Dewey Dell, were like my two favorite. And Cash is very soft-spoken, like barely has any parts of this. Other people are talking about Cash usually, and not Cash talking about himself or like the events. But then towards the end, Dewey Dell kind of becomes the star of the book as she's like trying to get that kind of like abortion elixir from the pharmacists in these towns.
Or like, potentially procedure.
Right, or an abortion procedure or
something. She's not even entirely sure what she's asking for, except that she was told that she could get medicine by the guy who knocked her up.
Right, yeah. And of course, this is Mississippi in 1930, so like she's going into these towns and asking pharmacists about female troubles, and they're all offended. They're like, well, you want my advice? Go get that boy to marry you or whatever, very religious, Christian kind of, abortion
all really
was illegal.
Fucked up, basically shame on you.
In America at this time.
That kind of shit.
And in America at this time, abortion was illegal.
But finally, some guy thinks that she's pretty, so he's willing to entertain the idea.
Everybody remembers the big hit, right? Or maybe not. Cider House Rules, right? That novel, and then the movie was a big hit where it's about like this doctor who would perform illegal abortions because he was the only one that would do it, kind of thing. And then he trains this young boy who didn't go to medical school to do it, and like as he's like retiring and getting older, kind of, Cider House Rules. It's very good story, very good movie. People who look it up if you haven't seen it. But yeah, just about the whole because it was illegal. It was illegal. It wasn't like today where we like, we understand that it's important to have access to that kind of stuff for healthcare. So, product of its time. This is why we talk about books being like kind of the context around books, kind of a record of what we saw, even if it is a fiction kind of thing, what the world was like. But Dewey Dell being pregnant, and that's where we
it
get
also
like
sounds like Darl seemed to know what was up.
Yeah, well, that's what we talked about. There was like a little bit of a hint that Darl and Vardaman saw him. Like Vardaman saw her having sex with the guy or whatever in the barn.
Or something.
Because Vardaman keeps talking about how like he can't say what he saw. Dewey Dell made him promise not to say what he saw, kind of thing, around the barn because he was looking for stuff.
But I thought the thing that he saw. So here's what I'm unclear about, because I also thought that at first, but then I thought maybe
It was Daryl burning the barn down.
Yeah, I thought that's what they said it was.
I think you're right, but then I started thinking, like, is it both? Because Vardaman's
Yeah.
a little kid, he's kind of playing around the barn,
Is
and he
he?
sees, well, at least
Again,
younger than the
still
other
don't
ones.
know. The only age we know is that Dewey Dell is 17, and everyone is older than her except for Vardaman.
Right, so it makes me think that, like, Daryl and Cash are, like, in their 30s, right? Like,
Or 20s, marriage age.
right.
I mean, because that's alluded to, right? They need to get married.
Yeah. But
but
something
yeah.
about, yeah, go on, sorry.
But yeah, the whole thing, I mean, we should talk about Darl too.
Going crazy at the end. What did we think of
yeah.
Daryl going crazy? Yeah.
I was confused as fuck.
Me too. It didn't quite fit, I thought.
I was really lost. I was like, wait, when, how, what? Like, it just seems like all of a sudden we learned that he's being taken away and he's like, he won't stop laughing. Or maybe it was that he got found out. Right? Someone one of the guys. So basically, it sounds like maybe Vardaman saw Darl setting fire to the barn. Right? So they had stopped somewhere after they, get across the bridge, right? And everything goes wrong. Probably should mention that. Everything fucking goes wrong.
Well, because the bridge is flooded, they try to pass it anyway,
Cash
going under the water.
breaks his leg and passes out. They then
take the wagon over the bridge under the water, but it gives because the bridge is giving, and the bridge gives out, and the wagon
They
can't
lose
take
their
it.
mules, I guess. So
mules die.
Yeah.
Cash gets kicked in the stomach and breaks his leg because he's trying to hold on to the coffin and his tools while everything's going underwater. And, everybody else is jumping clear, and Cash is staying there trying to hold the reins. And so he gets stuck. And, because Cash is like the stoic hero character. He's very quiet, very kind of stoic cowboy, Southern cowboy, right? He's like, it don't bother me none, right? He's had a broken leg for days.
But it's
He's
so
probably in
pissed me off.
excruciating,
because that's
probably in
exactly
excruciating pain. And they're like, are you okay,
But
Cash?
that-
He's like, it don't bother none. Just kept saying
yeah, but that doesn't. I don't know. That didn't make him more likable to me. That just made him more like ants.
Stubborn and
stupid, or just like unwilling to take help.
That's when they go.
They pour anything.
They pour concrete
okay.
to stabilize the leg.
Yeah,
they pour it right
and
onto
it's
his
just
skin.
like very clear that that's not okay. I mean, like you don't, I'm pretty sure that even in 1930 they knew that was a bad idea.
If you were educated, you probably knew. But most people weren't, right?
It seems like they're at this place and this guy is like, "You sure you want to do that? I don't know that I'd do that. You probably shouldn't do that."
And they're like, just throw some sand in it. It'll be all right. It don't bother me none. That's what Cash says. Yeah. And they like pouring the cement into his open wound. Like,
basically
giving him an infection.
Yeah, and then like his leg and toes, like his foot turns black, and
because the cement hardens and cuts off the circulation, and so now he has a dead foot.
It's fucking gross. They break it off, and it rips off his skin, and he's like, "Yeah, it's cool.
It don't bother me none."
Yeah, they won't take help. They won't take food from anybody. They're all like dropping weight. That's referred to a number of times. Like they all look kind of gaunt.
I ain't gonna be beholden to no man. That's what they kept saying.
Yeah, it's
right?
just all.
So if they took food, they'd be beholden to somebody. If they took money, if they buried her someplace other than Jefferson, they'd be
or
like,
said like, here, take our shit. Like you lost all your shit trying to cross this shitty bridge. Take our stuff. Take these horses.
Yeah.
Borrow them. And he says no over and over again. So yeah, I don't know. What were we even talking about? Darl going crazy? I don't
Talking
remember.
about Dewey Dell's kind of emphasis at the end and the kind of breaking up of the family as we go along this traveling
Yeah, but we
route.
were mentioning Darl going crazy too, right? Like, and how that was kind of strange.
Didn't quite fit with everything else.
So yeah, but like when they stop at this place and they're offered this other guy's team, as he says, which I assume just means like his mules, horses, whatever. and whatever else they
Right.
need to get to town. They say no, and I guess Vardaman sees Darl lighting the barn on fire.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I understood why that happened. I just remember, like, okay, it goes up in flames. Everyone's freaking out. They're trying to pull the animals out. Jewel is like, he ends up getting badly hurt, or at least
Right.
burned. Like, fairly badly, it sounds like. Because he goes in and tries to get the coffin that's also in there, too.
Jewel literally runs out with the coffin. Like, he literally
Yeah.
like catches himself on fire to like save his
Yeah.
dead mother's body.
And then after this moment, it sounds like maybe the people who, I don't remember, what are their names? Like McAllen or something? Or like
Callan and
something.
Samson are the I don't know. It's like some neighbor's house on their way.
Yeah,
So it's like a
it's-
neighbor, but you know, in the rural South at that time, a neighbor is 40 miles away or whatever.
Sure.
You know,
So
they don't see him all the time, but they
or
know
like
who they are.
someone whose name started with a G.
Yeah, I know who you're
I don't
talking
remember.
about.
But yeah, it was one of the sort of side people, right? Where they have been staying.
Armstead or
Sure,
something.
and they've been staying there, lights it on fire, and I guess someone learns that Darl did it. And what, they show up in town and take him away? Is that what happens? Because it was really unclear to me.
Yeah.
I'm
I
not
don't
saying
know
it was like
either.
unclear. I mean, like, I'm just not sure. It just didn't, I wasn't following at that point. But it does like make you inclined to like want to go back and see, like, is Darl just like going crazy through this whole thing? Like, is he like just beginning to lose his mind? Because he seems in a lot of ways like, to me, sort of like the reasonable one.
Right. Yeah, like I said, I don't know if it quite fit. I'd have to read again, but this is one, listeners, where like if you read it again, like you pick up more each time, you know.
Yeah, so
This
I'd
is
be
definitely
curious
one
to
you
read
want
it
to buy
again.
and reread every decade or so if you're a book person or you like.
I will
Faulkner,
say,
you
and the
know.
Norton is really good. It's not like it has extensive notes or anything through it.
I was
It's
gonna
not
ask,
constantly
actually,
pulling you
yeah.
out. No, it really, one of the only things that's noted throughout is reference to Bible verses.
Right, the kind of allusion to
And that's
that.
it.
And,
There's no like explanation of what's happening. There's no like, this is what Faulkner said, or this is what scholars have said. It's
it's
just,
always interesting. Like the footnotes are only as useful as whoever wrote them, you know.
Yeah,
So like when you're trying, like if there's this dead technology that would be really useful to
the
have
Bible
a
stuff
footnote.
didn't add anything. Like, I didn't really
Right,
read
yeah,
the Bible footnotes
exactly.
because I was like, I don't need that. Like, it's
Right.
not, it doesn't matter if it's referring to a specific verse in this
And
moment,
in
unless
my
I'm
copy-
writing some big paper that has to do with
Right,
the Bible
yeah.
and its interpretation in the South in this moment.
And
of
in my
this
copy,
novel.
you know, my copy is put out by Vintage. It doesn't have footnotes and like an introduction and
Yeah,
after,
and
you know,
most
and
copies aren't
forward
going
and
to.
afterward. Yeah. So like, and I agree with you that like I didn't need it. So like I could pick up on the religious themes. I could pick up on like the kind of allusions to religious stories without knowing the exact Bible
Yeah, well, and
passages
like, I
and
don't,
things like
yeah,
that.
you don't need to know those things. As one who is really just maybe
But one thing-
embarrassingly unfamiliar with any amount of like Bible literature.
Right.
Like, I didn't have a problem there.
But
That
one
was
thing I
not
will
what's-
say, I
was
wish.
confusing about this book.
Yeah. I wish more footnotes would emphasize what I really care about when I'm reading an old book with footnotes is like the dead tech. Because we had like a footnotes in that Moby Dick and stuff. I really wish that there were footnotes that would show me that like what this dead tech is, like what it looks like, or like what it was used
Yeah,
for.
that's
Because they
hard
just
to
refer to it
visualize
by
at
name,
first.
and everybody knew
Like,
what it
I
was
had
at
to
the
look
time.
up some
but,
of the technical, like, especially, I mean, immediately I was like,
yeah.
I don't remember, but it was something about the kind of saw that he was using to build the coffin or something. I don't remember what it was, but it was some piece of like, you know, farming shit or like, you know, building or carpentry stuff. Farming shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, even that, there's a lot of reference to farming equipment, but a lot of it's
Just
old,
stuff I
dead,
don't know
dead
about, yeah.
technology
Yeah.
farming equipment. So like pre-tractors, kind of every farmer owning a John Deere. But like as we move on here, what do we think of the ending?
Oh my God, dude.
Yeah,
Infuriating.
reactions. Infuriating.
I mean, it just can you hate Aunt Spundren anymore?
Yeah.
He stole his daughter's money that was given to her by the neighbor, right?
To get an abortion.
To get a secret abortion. Or I'm assuming, like, did the neighbor actually give it to her? Because Cora does not seem like somebody who would be cool with that. I did not read her as okay with abortion.
I'm sure she's not. Yeah, I'm sure the
or
character.
any amount of sex outside of marriage.
And there's a little bit of a
for that
hint.
matter.
There's a hint that Cora knew that in Addie's section that Jewel wasn't Ance's son. There's like a hint. They don't say it outright, but there's like a hint that Cora knew why she was always trying to tell Addie to pray for salvation and pray for her sins and stuff. And it's, it's very subtle, very literary in that way, like very subtle. But yeah, the ending I thought was pretty good because it ends with this, like nothing changes, kind of very kind of, Great Depression era modernist ending where it's like very tragic and very kind of, wow, like,
Yeah, well, basically they go to town to bury his dead wife and he comes home with a new one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and teeth.
And teeth now, yeah. That's
why he took the $10.
He took those $10 from his daughter so that he could go buy himself teeth.
Yeah.
And introduces in the last moments to this woman who is walking along beside him and he says, meet Mrs. Bundren.
Got me a new wife.
So
Got me
fucked
a new
up.
one. Got me a new one. Oh, yeah. Yeah, dude. Absolutely. I mean, but it is like it hits.
After they've been shooed out of
say.
town because the body like stinks so much.
Yeah, those were great scenes. When
That
they're coming
was
in,
one of
the
the
town
best.
folk are treating them like aliens coming into a
I
different
was
planet.
itching for something to happen so badly that like when shit started to go wrrong, I was like, thank God.
And the way that
Thank
we
God
get the
we
Dewey
finally
Dell,
have gotten to the bridge. It has been so long of reading about this fucking bridge. I'm so mad.
and when we get to the Dewey Dell, I think it's a good choice that he told it through the pharmacist perspectives, as like this little country girl with no shoes coming up to their store, and she had those black eyes that let him know that she went from the towns, right, as they say. She had little dark black eyes that let him know she was one of the rural girls, kind of thing. No shoes.
I don't remember. Oh, she didn't have shoes or anything?
Yeah, well, that's what the one pharmacist noticed, that she's in the kind of a dirty dress. She's barefoot, and he's like...
And she's like isn't she like wearing her good clothes too? Like
she
snuck
like
her good
changed, to go to town. But she's barefoot with dirty feet and all that. And he's like, she's walking like she's used to walking in bare feet kind of thing.
Yeah.
All that, yeah. That was a good choice. My last thing before we finish, did you want to talk class elements or fatherhood themes or anything like that? I think we hit everything else.
Why is Jules' mother a horse?
Right, I think that's Vardaman's way of knowing, right? Kind of. That
Is
Jewel,
it?
That
I don't
Jewel
know.
isn't
I was so confused.
like the rest of them. That Jewel's a little
because
different.
Doesn't that come through Darl first though?
Probably. Darl probably knows. Yeah. I don't know.
Like, your mother's a horse, but who's your father, Jewel? And you just keep saying, God damn you.
Right, yeah. But they all kind of know it,
Yeah. There's
And that
a bunch
kind of the
fucked up
fatherhood.
shit.
Yeah. We don't have to go too into it. But yeah, the class elements, I would say the best examples are that town scenes where they show the two different classes, people that live in town, have enough money to live in town, versus the people that live in the rural parts, all that. Fatherhood. Ants is a piece of shit. Like, kind of terrible father. All that.
It's just like using his kids, basically.
Right.
As service. As labor.
And they
taking their money
invoke...
and the things that they buy.
And the invocation of God, right? He thinks he deserves new teeth the way God intended him to, like, because he couldn't eat solid
to eat the
meats
food
and
God
stuff.
intended.
Yeah.
But
So you don't have
also,
teeth,
like,
it's pretty hard to chew.
but by his logic, also, God would have intended him not to have teeth.
Right.
right? Like
Well, he
all of
leaves
these
that part
things,
out,
because God has intended everything in His world. Everything is about God. God put roads far away from homes. You know, like that was the first moment when I was like, oh, this is funny to me now. God made the roads. Sorry, guys. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I can't not.
No,
God
we're
didn't make
atheists.
the roads.
Yeah. It's hard for us to do that. I get, yeah, it is hard. As like Sophie and I were both raised, like, again, we've talked about like raised in religions, but not like really super like Orthodox religions or like going to like temple or church every weekend and stuff. But like, you know, and then we both grew up to be like atheists, like overeducated atheists, I guess, right? Like,
Yeah, I don't know that anyone in my family believes in God, though.
Right.
Not that kind of religious.
But yeah, but I mean, you know, you and I are both kind of this, yeah. It's hard for us to say, oh, God did it. You know, it's hard for me to be like,
Right, but I think that's also something that Faulkner is like specifically like
right.
maybe poking
And
some fun at, or like,
and class kind of stuff too, right?
Yeah.
Like, we hit everything you wanted to.
yeah, there was that moment in the beginning that I was unsure about, where I guess Vardaman had put holes in the coffin.
Right, he like secretly drills holes because he thinks his mom's a fish or whatever, and needs
But
to
I didn't
breathe.
realize that. I was really confused, and I thought, like, because they had just been talking about ants, I think, so I was like, did ants do this? It was one of those pronoun places where I was really confused, and it wasn't clarified until later. And, like, he had put the auger through her face. There were auger holes in her face.
Right.
Jesus, dude. And that was just, like, the first fuck up. But, yeah, wild.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy. Good book, though. I mean, I'd recommend it.
Great
You
book,
should buy
really.
it.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's fucking sad.
Yeah. I haven't watched the movie version, but I was surprised to learn there's only one film version of this, and guess who directed it?
James Franco.
Yeah, Franco directed, wrote, and stars,
Yeah,
I
I'm
think.
aware.
Yeah. I haven't watched it, but it makes me want to watch it now. Maybe I'll do a bonus.
It makes so
listeners.
much sense to me
Yeah.
that there is only one adaptation, and it is his. I feel
Yeah.
like, I mean, it would be so hard.
The thing
think.
that, yeah, that's what Hollywood always said, was that it was unfilmable. Like the way it's told, you'd have to rewrite the whole story to make it like a coherent film version of this. And, you know, a lot of writers,
I imagine
would feel
that as a
kind
film,
of,
it
yeah.
would look very different. It would
Right,
be
and a lot of
essentially
writers-
a different story in some ways.
Is there a writer that would feel comfortable enough totally butchering Faulkner to make a coherent screen? You know, that would puts writers in a
Yeah,
weird
James
position.
Franco.
Yeah, Franco was willing to do it, but yeah, I don't remember how that was reviewed. It probably wasn't reviewed well.
Couldn't have been
Yeah.
well, because like,
I would have heard of it otherwise.
yeah, I think we
probably would have
both
seen
would
it.
have.
Yeah. But I might watch it now that we've read this and do a bonus, listeners. So subscribe, patreon.com/heavyboard, maybe.
Yeah.
All right, we good? You done? I think we hit everything. That's good.
Oh, yeah. And soiled garments. Do we think? Are we gonna go there? Did Addie shit herself?
Yeah, probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
Well,
So
yeah, I
don't
think that's all.
shit yourself in your deathbed, dude.
I mean, hopefully, like, you know, if it happens before I'm put into any kind of burial space.
Yeah, they'll usually. Well, that's why we embalm bodies. Yeah, we take all that out before.
Jews don't.
Oh, really?
No, yeah.
Like
we
just
don't.
Orthodox
We don't.
ones, or like?
To my knowledge, we do not. Period.
But I mean, like
you
people
have
that
to have the funeral quickly. Like,
right.
I don't think in my family that's something that happens, but maybe it does. I don't know.
I guess it would depend how strict you adhere to the
I really
religious
honestly
doctrine.
don't know. I really
Because I don't know if there's state laws against that. Like you can't just bury like a unembalmed dead body somewhere.
Yeah, I
I mean, I
don't
guess you
fucking know.
could, but it's not technically.
I mean, there are
legal,
Jewish
but-
cemeteries.
Yeah, okay. I guess there's like exceptions for that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about
But
it.
yeah, I don't know either, actually. couldn't tell you. But like we also don't like view the body, like that's a thing.
Right. Yeah. Huh. Did you ever watch that movie, The Vigil?
Maybe.
With about like that, like in Orthodox Judaism, you have to watch the body. You have to sit shiva, but then there's somebody that like watches the body when nobody's there because you're not supposed to leave the body alone.
Yeah.
And then there's like, it's like a horror movie.
I remember this, but I don't remember what happens or if I actually finished it.
It's a decent movie. It's a decent little indie flick, kind of low budget indie horror movie. Decent. A lot of it's in, Yiddish or Hebrew or something. Like half the movie's in subtitles.
I feel like I remember.
It's about like,
on TV.
Yeah, like an Orthodox community in like a city, probably New York or, a vague city like that. And it's decent little horror indie flick. Made some noise, I think in like 2018, 2019 it came out. It was all right, yeah. But yeah, they don't talk about embalming bodies, so I don't know. But yeah. All right, that's it, listeners. This has been Heavy Board. See ya.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.